Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give just a minute for people to trickle in, and then we will get started. As you come in, you should see closed captioning enabled, but you can also click out of that. And we will definitely be out of here within an hour today. My goal is to leave some time for questions at the end, so feel free as they occur to you to put them in the Q&A function. Without further ado, let's get started, because we've got a lot of stuff that I want to just touch on, make sure that we cover before final exam season hits us. My name is Tal Kitron with Appleruth Tutoring. I work as a premium tutor, mostly just online, SAT, ACT, PSAT, and a few other subjects. And then as well, I work as an executive function coach. Today, though, we're going to just be talking about final exam season. If you're a student or a parent or guardian of a student, we're just going to talk about some tips to make it more manageable and set yourself up for success the best we can. And these are our three cornerstones. Test prep, which I do a lot of, and then academic tutoring if your student's struggling in school with a certain subject. We offer support for that, as well as executive function coaching, which is more about helping students think about the way they think. It's a very interesting, cool, newish thing. Here's what we're going to be covering today. And again, as questions come up, feel free to put them in the Q&A. One, we're going to be talking about how to create the right attitude towards school. It's never too late to work on that, or too early. How to effectively use working memory to our best advantage, effective study techniques, memory improval. A lot of students, I mean, definitely, a solid half of mine have some sort of test anxiety. So if that's severe, how to mitigate that or how to manage it. And then finally, we'll talk about what's our game plan for final exam week or weeks, right? What can we do to make sure that we're organized and well prepared? Number one dichotomy is going to be a proactive student and approach versus a reactive approach. So if you have the right attitude and the right proactive approach, good study habits will generally follow from that. You can see here's a student with an organized desk area, minimize distractions, right? All that. Here are some characteristics of a proactive student. These are things we want to cultivate and treasure. Proactive ones are generally the ones who know what the assignments are when they're due, right? And then we plan accordingly. And I mean, a lot of my students do this, but a lot need help with that. Many of us are procrastinators. A proactive student doesn't procrastinate too much, right? We leave ourselves time. So if an essay is due on Friday, we try to get it done Wednesday so that we have Thursday to peer review or just kind of go back and look at it and edit. Asking questions, I mean, this can vary from student to student, but ideally you're in a safe space and you trust your teachers or fellow classmates to ask questions early and often. That'll get you the most information and clear up any uncertainties. On that note, a proactive student wouldn't make assumptions. We try to read the syllabus or the assignment itself to understand it before starting it, let alone completing it. Right? Because it's very tempting if it's a paper to start writing before we have a full sense of what we're going to craft. And then proactive students aren't going to cram. They're going to study gradually as the semester goes on and reinforce things. Usually that results in satisfactory grades. And then oftentimes that results in a lot of college acceptances. Right? So that's painting with a broad brush. But this is what you want out of a proactive approach. Compare that to reactive. So as you might expect, a reactive student who realizes last minute, oh crap, this is all the stuff I have to do tomorrow. Right? So this is characterized by missing deadlines and hoping the teacher will be okay with that or just kind of offer a makeup. Not asking questions or for help. We do make assumptions. That would be reactive and not great. Cramming. Teachers always know the students who are going to ask for extensions or some sort of makeups. right? And sometimes that just happens, it's life. But when a student does it consistently, you'll get labeled as a reactive student, right? Which can be reflected in a poorer grade. So that's usually the result. We wait to the last minute, we panic, we may have then fewer college applications and also fewer college acceptances. So proactive versus reactive. The good news is we all know how to be proactive. Doing it's another matter, but we want to kind of think about, okay, so what are things that this student has done throughout life that they've worked hard at, right? So maybe AP US history is a slog and it's just hard to envision like doing that first step. We had to compare it to that time where we wanted to make the orchestra freshman year, right? Or we wanted to get this part in a play, right? Or some success, some positive result so that you can positively visualize this particular study plan. So then you kind of talk through it. We think, what do we do to gradually improve? Like, how did you get that part? How did you improve on the bassoon to get so good at that? Was it setting aside a certain amount of time per day? Was it where you were when you were practicing? Right. And we'll think about all sorts of questions you can ask, right? It's not one size fits all. But then think about that and kind of what the student says, and then how can we apply a similar approach to academics? So how can we analogize this and make it work for you when it comes to history or calculus or whatever? Right. So we've been proactive. It's just a matter of harnessing it for academics. And this kind of comes to growth versus fixed mindset. So fixed mindset, which we don't love, is this self-fulfilling prophecy. We make a mistake and it's, oof, I'm so bad at math, which I hear a lot from students. And we try to change that. No, you're not bad at math, right? It's why do we miss it? Which part of this question tripped you up? Which part did you get right? Because a lot of times the student will know what they're solving for, they'll do a couple steps correct, and then just one step went wrong. What can we learn from that? If we see this next time on the SAT, how are we going to get it right? Right. So that's a growth mindset. We need to value mistakes, make mistakes, and learn from them. Right. It's not good to just go kind of perfectly through something. We don't learn that. And I really try to reinforce that with all my students is that making mistakes is good, right? Our session time is a safe place to make mistakes. We're going to do it and that's okay. And we're going to learn from it. Some students really hate being wrong, but on like a ACT, SAT, for example, you don't have to get every question right. You just have to finish as many as you can in time and it's graded on a curve. A lot of final exams are like that too, right? You may not get to every physics problem, but if you can get to most of them confidently, you can get a pretty good grade. And as we prepare anything that's tough at all, just value it, treasure that, and say, okay, this is something I need to review, whether it's by myself, with a classmate, teacher, or tutor. Think about the things that give you trouble. That is what you'll learn the most from. So let's talk just kind of generally about some things we can do as we prepare study plans for any classes, any finals. The acronym is GOAT, greatest of all time. The G in GOAT is for goals. And so this is actually very important. I think many students don't actually take the time to set a goal or specific goals, plural. And you want to make sure that the goals are lofty, but not too lofty. They have to be attainable, right? We'll talk about how to set goals and what that might mean, but maybe a safe goal and a stretch goal, right? So if you're doing a study session, or like, let's say you have a goal for your Spanish test, right? And like, you know that all year your best grade was an 85. So maybe getting 100 isn't realistic, but getting an A, getting in the 90s definitely is. Right. And then you can set maybe a loftier goal the next time. But it's important to be realistic, otherwise it can be overwhelming and pressure filled, which is not what we want. We're setting goals to make it more manageable. The O in GOAT is for organization. This is what executive function coaching helps with, among other things. But organization is key for focus. It's good to have a routine, whether that's time of day or place in the house that you're studying, tools that you need, making sure you've got everything properly laid out. And then I use Google Calendar for everything, but I think high school students who do really benefit. So actually adding break time and study time, not just events to your calendar. right? And maybe even adding leisure time too, so you've built in breaks. But I do think being organized and having that study time in there, like from 7 p.m. to 8:30, I'm studying for this final exam. The A is for attention. We want to focus our attention on the work. So making sure you're limiting distractions. If you know that you are distracted by social media or like a Discord or a video game, and you just know that's your go-to, you need to make that harder to access. And that can be really hard. It's a big part of coaching where it's like, number one thing is, how do I make what's easy hard and what's harder, which is often the schoolwork, easier or more desirable to do, right? Create your routine. It's like working out. It's like a lot of things. If you get in the zone, it's going to start to be easier and just more second nature. Maybe you find yourself taking breaks, and then if it's like certain things are okay, right? You get a snack, you take a walk, that's fine. But if you get into a video game or a conversation with a friend, you're going to take too long. So set it as 5, 10, 15 minutes maximum. Make sure you're limited on time and not just taking a forever break, right? And then that way, what happens then is the work is almost the break, which is no good. So built-in breaks, but keep them short. And I really think a 15, 20-minute break even is okay, as long as you're not, as long as you're setting a ratio and not going overboard with break time. And then T's for testing, meaning obviously we're preparing for exams, but you want to always check yourself. So if you're making mistakes, it's fine. We just need to learn from that, right? So this may be going back through notes and writing summaries. It may be just asking yourself, hey, if I get this question on the test, what will I write? Sometimes writing that down is really crucial. It's effortful, but important. And maybe it's just like you're teaching it to a parent or a pet or a sibling or a picture or a mirror or a classmate, but saying it out loud, teaching it to someone else, very, very effective. One of the best ways to retain information. So kind of on this note, how do we can encourage our students, whether it's a child or your student, to study more efficiently? And the other question we got to ask is, can we encourage them to be more proactive in their study plans? And again, this is an open-ended question because not everyone's the same. Some students will do better with like a reward, right? If you do this much, you'll get this. Other students are going to do better with, if you don't do this, you can't do that, right? If you want to go to the baseball game on Friday, then you have to get this done before then. And ultimately, it may not be as simple as that. You may just need to try to create this intrinsic motivation. And sometimes that's just a matter of like setting goals. What is my goal? Is it to get into this certain college? Well, realistically, here's the grades we need. So maybe that's what'll light the fire. Or for test prep, if it's, well, I want to start summer of junior year, but the student's not motivated, the sell for a lot of students is, let's try to get it done before junior year ends. Try to find whatever the motivation is, right? That thing that will make the student feel like, okay, I want to take ownership of this and succeed. That will lead to proactivity and efficiency. But the biggest thing I see is just phone and distractions online. So if we limit that, we're golden. Going to talk a bit about memorization, which is definitely more than just reading a chapter, completing a worksheet. Sometimes you just need a bigger picture. So even like in history, for example, understanding what happens behind the scenes can help us memorize effectively. So some ways we can think about that. Think of your brain as a network of connections. And I thought that was the next slide. But what they are is they're not automatically linked. So our job as parents, as teachers, as students is to create these links and build connections across ideas so that they've got a net and then you can recall them more effectively. We're going to talk about how that works. One way to create links is honestly just review. Learn something and then 24 hours later or within 24 hours, make sure you learn it again, right? So if I tried to memorize like the first 20 presidents, I could read it and I could probably do it and a minute later recite it, but then the next day I will have definitely forgotten. No way. But if I review it a few more times, I can probably actually memorize it and have a fun party trick. It works with vocab, dates, formulas, really everything. So learn it, review it within 24 hours, and I would add do it again then, like about 5 to 7 days later, and you'll be, I think, amazed with how much you'll retain. So learn it and then review it again. Right, in law school, that was a really effective technique too, because you're typing so fast and just taking notes, you're not really internalizing it. So review it the next day. A big part of test taking, whether that's tests like standardized tests or finals, is working memory. We're trying to keep a limited amount in our brain at once, right? So like there's only a certain amount you can keep in your mind. And generally what's going to happen is the more you try to crowd in a short term, something's going to get pushed out. However, we can actually harness our working memory and use it to study effectively. And this is what I mean by that. I do think that this is what the 24-hour review trick is forced recall, right? So thinking to yourself, either it's right after or a little bit after of, okay, just read an article. What did I just read? What was the main purpose of this paragraph? And then actually writing it down. This is something that I think students will resist because it's effortful. It's easier just to think of the question and think of the answer. But when you find yourself writing it down like you will on the test, it's going to lead you into little stumbling blocks and probably ideas that then you can use on test day. So forced recall is forcing yourself to actually ask questions and write them down in preparation for test day. This is what I was talking about earlier about linking ideas. I've got some questions coming in, which is good. Keep them coming. This question that I'll answer now is about, is taking a nap to internalize information a good or bad idea? There's a lot of studies that say taking a nap is a really effective way. I think it's going to differ from person to person. But yeah, there's a lot of studies that say that if you learn something and then you like sleep and kind of, just go straight from learning and then napping, people say that you retain it really well. I think it's going to be different from person to person. But I think naps are just good generally. I think sleep's important. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. 5 minute nap, I don't know. I feel like I can't ever do less than about 20, but I do think it's an interesting thing. The danger would be if you're a student, most of mine are exhausted this time of year. A 5 minute nap seems unrealistic because they'd probably then pass out for a couple hours. If we have ideas that are like this, just kind of floating around, it's hard to link them and comprehend how they're connected. If we link them, then we're much more likely to remember all of it, reinforce these ideas, and kind of, if you see how they operate together, that can help you memorize, right? So you have to link ideas together to memorize them. You don't want to see them in isolation. We're going to talk about study plans at the end too. But yes, this whole thing's about study plan for finals. The GOAT is just a good acronym for general rules. Mnemonic devices, tough word to spell and say. We've all probably encountered them. So like PEMDAS, SOHCAHTOA. If I wanted to memorize how to spell mnemonic, I would think, okay, M before N in the alphabet. These are definitely effective ways to memorize. And there is no bad mnemonic. Anything that works for you, no matter how goofy it is fine, right? So like maybe these are some that you've seen before. Every good boy deserves fudge for reading music. This is about, I guess, sailing and weather conditions. So you can use alliteration and rhyme to memorize stuff. If you wanted a vocab word other than word roots, do you think decorous? Well, what does decorous mean? It sounds like decorate. And it does, there is the way then you could use that to memorize the definition of in good taste. That's little things I tell people, like for circumference and area. There's 2 pi r, there's pi r squared, area is squarea. So that's how you remember which one is which. Area is pi r squared for a circle, and circumference is 2 pi r, the other one. If you do create your own, just make sure that your student is explaining it to you, right? If your student's teaching it to someone, again, that could be a pet, mirror, or especially a person, that will help them reinforce it. It's just like writing things down and forcing a recall. Here's my mnemonic, here's what it stands for. I've now proved to you and myself that I can recall that. So just kind of getting into some more ideas. And at the end, we're going to talk about specifically Sarah Fletcher, who's a Appleruth tutor extraordinaire and coach. She has laid out like a study plan. But I want to talk just about some things that will work for some people. Don't take this as I must do this, right? Think about, yeah, I think I could see my student liking this, and just take down ideas. Some people are really big on color coding notes with little tags, right? So maybe certain types of information is going to be like people is all going to be purple, but events will all be red. And then in math, maybe we have all our formulas listed in yellow, right? So any formula I need to memorize, that's all in yellow, but any vocabs in green, and any proofs that I need to memorize are in black. Right, so color coding, I never use that, but I think that some of my students I know have and really like it. There's some other questions to ask. So as you review your notes for midterms and for final exams, each unit, you got to think about what might the teacher ask me. So that's how we're framing all of this. So then how do we create a connection? Well, these are certain questions you could ask. What's the subject here? Who are we talking about? When and where was it? And then the last two are really important. What caused it and what did it cause? Right? So kind of this flow chart of why are we learning this? Why is it important in context? And the more that you can force yourself or your student to write out the answers, the better, because then you know you've already done it on test day. Right? So especially if it's like a short response test, having written out answers to questions that flesh out your knowledge is huge, really important. Time management is, of course, key, both in terms of studying and then test taking itself. So think about what tests are we preparing for? How much time do we have? Is it in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, next week? And think about how many days between tests. Is there a day with multiple tests? Sometimes they do that. And then based on that, we got to set up our study schedule. That includes some breaks, but it also really working backwards from test day, you need to be planning out when we're studying, so that it doesn't come to like the last 2 days before the test and we realize, oh crap, I've got all this stuff I have to review. Right? So organization well in advance. Don't sleep on the syllabus, right? So often the syllabus says exactly what the final is going to cover. Make sure you talk to either past students or the teacher or peers about what the format is. We need to know what types of questions are on the test. We need to know how many questions. Is it going to be all multiple choice or is it written responses? If it is, do we need a thesis for each paragraph? Right? Because if you don't do that stuff and like you know the grading rubric and what it's going to look like, you're just sacrificing points needlessly. If it's a math class, do you get partial credit? Right? Because if not, if there's a question you don't know, don't bother. But if so, then try to work it out. You get some credit for trying. Right? So really just understanding what to expect. As far as how to study, I mean, many students are doing it individually. Group study sessions can be great or not so great. As long as all the students are putting in the work there for the right reasons, not coasting on other people's efforts, right? Or distracting, or just, I don't know, you kind of know it when you know it. But if all the students in a group are there for the right reasons, the study sessions can be wonderful. If it's structured, you scheduled it, it's in a place where there aren't distractions, wonderful. Ideally, the goal behind that would be like each of the 4 students in the group specialize in one thing and then come and teach it to the rest. Not only will you become an expert in the thing you teach, but it should also help you more effectively learn the other topics that your peers worked on. And then talking about like leading into exam week itself, good sleep is number one, and it's at a premium right now. My students aren't sleeping much. They're drinking coffee, which is crazy to me in high school, but that's just kind of the reality. Don't skip breakfast, right? Protein is good brain food. My mom always made sure that I ate fish the night before a big test. Make sure that students have what they need, right? So we don't want to have any externality where we get there, it's like, oh, I forgot my calculator or something silly. So you lay that out the week or at least the day before. And then positive visualization and affirmation. I want to talk a little bit about that and test anxiety. Some individual personal affirmations can go a long way. So maybe that's you doing the work and writing it, and then just even hearing from your parent, wow, I've really seen the work you've put in. No matter how you do, I'm proud of how you prepared. Right. Just that little thing can really be a nice boost. And so anxiety, which we touched on, is a pretty big thing. Uh, Different subjects will, I think, elicit different anxieties. And of course, not all students experience this. What we need to consider is that some stress is good. There's this eustress or good stress kind of top of this parabola where it's healthy anxiety, right? I'm anxious about it because I want to get a good grade and it matters to me because the teacher's opinion matters and I want to succeed and my parents' opinion matters. So I need to prepare. That could be healthy. Low anxiety is not great because then you're just thinking like if you're super low anxiety, it's almost gets to the point where we're not motivated, we don't care. So we want a little bit, right? We want to be kind of having our endorphins going. And then of course there's that unhealthy anxiety where we're panicking, we're thinking, oh gosh, I'm gonna fail, and when I fail, this is what'll happen, and all this bad stuff. Right. So that's the bad stress that we want to try to avoid or walk back. And there are ways to do that. One way beyond just kind of naming and taming the anxiety beast, which we'll talk about, is developing this inner coach, both before the test. You got this. This is what I try to tell my students. You're very well prepared. You know what to expect. This is not a test now you need to cram for. So just go in and do your best. Trust your process. And then during the test, same thing. Okay, so I'm hitting this question that's giving me trouble. What do I do? Well, we've learned don't panic, just skip past it. I'll come back later, right? I think I have this, but right now it's just taking me too long, making me anxious. Let me move to the next question, right? So just having this calm inner monologue that's kind of coaching you to get through it. And again, we want to name this anxiety monster and we want to tame it. So this is what like anxiety will tell us. This voice in our head that's saying, "Oh, here we go again," and then catastrophizing about future things. I'm not going to get this question right, so I'm not going to get an A. So I'm not going to be in the top 10% of my class. So I'm not going to get into Stanford. And then what's even the point? But that type of thinking, not only is it not helpful, it's actually not realistic. Right. So first is just seeing, okay, here's what my anxiety monster tells me. So listen, Rupert, I'm not gonna be intimidated by you or made anxious by these thoughts. Instead, I'm gonna listen to my inner coach. Right. So the monster's saying, uh-oh, 5-minute warning, we're screwed. The coach is saying, 5-minute warning. All right. Well, I haven't finished everything, but I've gotten to most of it. Let me pick out a few more that I can get to. And I did the best I could. Easier said than done, takes practice, but name the anxiety and that will help you tame it. Again, affirmations, confidence in yourself, positive visualization, all of it is very much underrated and crucial. And we breed confidence with practice and just hard work. So it doesn't just come. We don't want this irrational confidence. We want it to come from effort. So before we get into kind of Sarah's week of and little game plan, what we covered so far is proactivity versus reactivity, GOAT, so goals, organization, attention, and testing, mnemonic devices and other memorization methods, Making sure that the student has the support they need. So if you notice anxiety, kind of helping talk through, think about past successes, acknowledge test anxiety, and generally create this positive outlook, right? These tests don't define you. Let's see what we can do to set ourselves up for success. That's all you can do. So this is something that we've included. Sarah Fletcher, who we call the math fairy, is a tutor who's been at Applewood for a long time. And she just got some thoughts on kind of what we can do leading up to final exam week and test day. Some of this we talked about, but number one, Sarah says, is find out everything you can, absolutely everything about the test. If it's not in the syllabus or it's not laid out recently in class, make sure you know from the teacher, right? They're going to give you a clear answer. We need to know what topics are covered, what the format is, whether it's multiple choice or short answer or both, and then timing. Do we get points for partial credit or just if it's completely correct? And then am I going to have my book? Do I get a calculator? What resources? Do we get scratch paper? Like what can and can't we have? So important to plan really definitively and also thoroughly. Think about what resources you have. So do we have a study guide? Are they going to provide one? Is it one of those study guides that you're supposed to work through on your own? Or is it just something they've already done for you? Notes. I think many classes, if we have notes from the class, looking back at it and thinking about why did I think this was important, paraphrasing, translating. Maybe there are previous tests that you took that year or even previous semesters sometimes. So making sure that we know here's what's been tested previously. This is what the teacher wants us to know clearly. And then there's a textbook that we're supposed to practice with. Just what resources do we have? Usually hard copies are best. And then make your plan, right? So this will be different for each test. You talk timing. How much time do I have until the actual test itself? And then realistically, how much material do I need to review? Like, do I have 10 hours worth? It may be hard to estimate, right? Do I have 10 chapters or just 2 chapters, right? 3 tests and a bunch of assignments or just a couple? And then think about like, is this about flashcards for vocab? Is it about finding flowchart relationships between events and history? Is it math where I'm just doing practice problems to perfect this subject I'm not great at? And then as you do that, it's like, well, what has worked for me in the past? It's important to think about what hasn't been effective, but maybe even more important, think about what does work, right? So I always ask students, like, what teaching style works for you? And then what learning style? And sometimes that just helps people think about what they don't like, but that leads to what they do like, what works. And then it's not just when, but also where. So setting up a really good study spot. Studies have shown that like if you learn something in one place and then review it somewhere else, that's actually good for memorization. But you do want to go to organized, neat study area at home, right? And or at school or library. So thinking about where you're going to do it so that you are setting yourself up for a quiet, calm learning environment. And then as we do that, so if I know I'm going to be studying at home, well, I better make sure that I've got everything filed and I know that my history stuff is right here and everything I need to study for history is there. And then in this drawer, I've got math. I know that I tend to get distracted because I get texts. And so like I just kind of I'll text my friends a little bit. What can I do to mitigate that or lessen that distraction? Well, maybe when I'm studying for a final, I need my phone in the other room, right? Or at least connect to the charger. Just think about that, or just if you know your dog is going to be or your cats are going to be at the door, which I knew before this presentation, I knew I better feed them right before I start, so that they are blissfully elsewhere. Make a schedule, right? So this is important to plan out. Again, study time, break time, work time, all that stuff. And think about realistically how long should the sessions be? You're probably better off doing 3 1-hour blocks. In fact, you're definitely better doing 3 1-hour blocks than 1 3-hour block. Just because by the second and third hour, you're not going to retain as much. You're going to be more tired. Instead, you're just better off doing smaller chunks. That's almost always true. Take a 25-minute chunk of stuff, review it for 5 minutes, take a quick break, and then come back. Right, but put it on your calendar. And then like keeping yourself accountable is a big thing. So I think parents can help with that, but it's a fine balance. Eventually, it has to come from intrinsic motivation. So maybe there's a reward system. Maybe it's just a chart. I'm very big on like if I've got a thing that I need to accomplish and I need to check off that task, like it stresses me out until I do it. Not everyone's like that. Accountability buddy. So maybe just someone who's studying for the same exam, or even just a fellow student who can check in with you and say like, hey, did you look at this today? So that might remind you, oh, well, Michael spent 2 hours studying. I guess I should probably do a little bit of that too, because we've said we were going to do that each day. Right. So just keeping yourself accountable. And then just a few more things. So as you think about what are the subjects, what's my timeline, be realistic and think about, well, I remember this section, the unit circle was really hard. I bet I need help with that. Who can help me? Do I need to go to office hours? Is it just reviewing past assignments, or should I talk to a fellow classmate? So think about that. Like if the test is on Thursday and the last office hours are on Tuesday, you better make sure that you have done some studying by Monday of that week, so that if you have questions, you can go in on Tuesday for those last office hours opportunity. You can definitely do flashcards, always nice with another person, even if it is a parent or guardian. Study sessions with a friend, accountability again. And then if there's a ton, then consider tutoring. Of course, a lot of people are doing that throughout the year and some just in advance of finals. We've got a lot of great tutors who help with academic subjects and specialize in certain AP classes, for example, or just math or science. Maybe a tutor is in order, right? And it might just be a little bit to help with organization. And then after you've made your plan, we must enact it. So this is the last thing. Make sure you have study sessions, whether it's on your own or a group or both. Make sure you've got a checkpoint to see like, all right, well, I've started this plan, 4 days ago. Is it working? Because if not, you can adjust it. This is not like you have defined a thing for yourself forever. We're trying to find a comfort zone for what works and helps you study effectively. And if that happens and things aren't working perfectly, don't take that to heart, right? So like you can really be like, oh my God, well, I'm spending all this time and it's not working, and I'm just frustrated. So some building of frustration tolerance is important, and also just realizing that it's not going to be perfect. It may not work really well as you implement these study strategies the first time, right? It's a process. You don't necessarily have to or should expect to get it right the first time, especially if like studying and preparing for tests is something that you're not that fond of or you're struggling with. So this is a process. It takes time, and you may have to work with someone to do it. You just have to work to find your comfort zone. That wraps up what we need to cover today. If you are interested in tutoring, whether that's in person in any of our areas with offices or online or coaching or academic tutoring, I can give you the link, and then we're going to open it up for questions. Just one moment, and I'll chat that link to you guys. Okay, and back. I also want to tell you about our season of giving, so the new deal with pay as you go for tutoring. I'm going to show you that. Here is the link that I mentioned. And then we've got plenty of time for questions. If you feel satisfied, hopefully you've gotten a lot out of today, feel free to take off. And if you do have questions, I'm going to leave at least 10, 15 minutes here to answer some. Again, here's the link. And the deal that we are running is if you have current tutoring with Apple Ruth, you can refer someone and you'll both get a free hour for another package. So a nice thing, going back one slide. The executive function coaching, if you're interested, is usually 30-minute sessions. We often start with once or twice a week and try to then make that a little bit less often over time. The goal is to help students be organized and think about the way they think. So it's really nice for final exam season, but also just good in general during the school year. All right, I think I've got everything up there. Apple Ruth info is down at the bottom here. So any questions that you guys have, I'm happy to answer. Please go ahead and fire them my way. Of course, if you don't have questions, feel free to call it an evening, and I really appreciate you joining. All right. Seeing no questions, I think we'll call it an evening. Feel free to call this number or email with any questions that do come up. And good luck with finals. Have a great rest of your evening. Thanks so much for joining.